live edition of Buckeye Talk. This is our new weekly thing. We're going to try to do this every single Wednesday around noon. We started at 12:15 today, but around noon every Wednesday for the rest of the season. We're going to be doing live Buckeye Talk shows, and we'll see from there. We'll see how this goes. Maybe it'll travel into the off season, but for now, it's going to start on Wednesdays during the season. I am Stephen Means. That is Stefan Krajisnik, and that is Andrew Gillis. We have always had our Thursday pods be big topic discussions already. We're just deciding to do it live now on Wednesdays. This will still be in your feeds every Thursday morning. So if you can't join the live for any reason, any specific week, then don't worry about it. It's not like if you didn't watch it live, you can't get it at all. I mean, you could also just get it on YouTube. I think YouTube just records it, so that is what it is too. But still, if you want it in your feeds, this will still be in your feeds. And today, we got a fun discussion. We're talking super teams. We've seen 4 weeks of college football, so of course we want to know if there are any teams this year who might be some of the greatest football teams of all time. And it's based off a question from our texter, 614-350-3315. It's a 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that. From the 937, it seems to me that there isn't a single dominant team in college football at the moment this year. From what you have seen and know, what team or teams have the best opportunity to become seemingly dominant by the end of the season? In my opinion, Ohio State and Miami look very good and would seem to be on pace to reach that level. So based off of that question, I kind of took that question and instead of making it a, hey, let's just list 4 teams we think might be awesome this year, and try to make it a big picture conversation of what it takes to be a super team. How many super teams have there been in the college football playoff era? So this is going back to 2014. And what are the criteria? So here's what we're going to be discussing today. We're going to list our criteria, us, as in myself, Andrew, and Stefan, and our texter, 614-350-3315. It's a 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that. And then we're going to get into the candidates where each of us are going to provide 2 teams that we think could be a part of this list, why they're a likely candidate, what's in their way of becoming a super team. And so let's get into the criteria. It's 3 criteria from each of us. I actually have a longer list than 3 criteria because I'm me, and that's just kind of how I do things. Andrew, right, Andrew. Who am I unless I break the rules and do more than what's required, right?
Hey, Stefan, Andrew, do this very specific thing. Got it. I have very specific things. And you're like, hey, guys, just so you know, I broke the rules. We haven't even started yet. Good job.
It's Buckeye Talk, man. It's where 2 people follow the rules I set and then I completely break them for no reason other than just I'm a rule breaker. It's what I do. So let's start with Stefan. What is your number 1 criteria? Like, it's non-negotiable. You cannot be considered a super team unless you are this. Is essentially what we're answering here. What's number 1 on your list?
So I went back and forth with it for a little bit because, there's an understanding that the 12-team college football era is maybe a little different, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I still think you have to go undefeated to be a super team. I debated maybe a 1-loss team can be in that discussion. I went back and forth with it, and I think for you to be a super team, like for me, this was very, very high standard. Like, you cannot be beaten to be a super team. So that was my number 1 thing. Number 1 piece of criteria was to be undefeated. And I think what's interesting is there got to a point last year with the 2024 Ohio State team where the way they played in the playoff had all the qualities of a super team. They were dominant on both sides of the ball. And they look like a team where, and we'll mention some super teams that fit our criteria later. But like, I think the example that kind of comes to everyone's mind when you talk about super team is 2019 LSU. And there were times where Ohio State, the way they played in the playoff, you could talk yourself into, hey, that team could have competed with the 2019 LSU, with some of the best teams in college football history. But when you go 10-2, there's a level between great team can compete with the best teams and being a super team. And I still think being undefeated has some value, even in an era where it's really tough to go undefeated now because you're in this kind of NFL realm of preparing for 16, 17 games potentially. I still think, until proven otherwise, you have to be undefeated to be a super team.
So you were not alone in that thinking. A lot of our texters, in fact, that was the number 1 thing that they were saying is you have to be an undefeated super team. From the 860, a super team has to be undefeated, full stop. No such thing as a super team with a loss. If you're a super team, You also have some big wins against good teams. For example, OSU had beaten Oregon and Michigan in the regular season. Had Ohio State beaten Oregon and Michigan in the regular season last year, then did what they did against Tennessee and Oregon in the playoff. That would absolutely check all the boxes for me to be a super team. Another must-have for a super team that just came to me, similarly to how you guys would talk about each QB superpower or a super trait that each day QB has had. The super team needs to have a superpower. 2021 Georgia had their defense. 2019 had Joe Burrow and his receivers, something that makes them almost feel inevitable, like Thanos and the Avengers. I'm going to come back to that second part of that because that's going to get into mine. But from the 5-1-3, undefeated is an absolute must. Super teams don't lose. And then Rob from the 304 maybe provided a different perspective on this. I don't know if you agree, Andrew, that you have to be undefeated to be considered a super team or not. But super team definition is really subjective. So along with winning a national championship, I would have said in the past that undefeated was a non-negotiable, but with more games and high-end teams in the Big Two conferences, aka the Big Ten and the SEC, undefeated is either a perfect deciding step or might not even be a reasonable expectation now. The subjective part is the dominance eye test. Super teams must show some level of dominance and looking different. The 2002 Trussell Buckeyes were not a super team. I would say now an undefeated natty from the Big Ten or the SEC would probably be a probable super team because of who they had to play / beat to get there. But an ACC or Big 12 team, even if undefeated, would have to show me more than just winning, especially against the best teams. Couple other areas, they must be the best O and or D in the nation: Big 10, SEC, Big 12, ACC, Notre Dame. With the other side still being very high, this one may be a soft, the best, but you may have to have the number 2D with a number 4O, where a team that stat-wise had a better D but lost one or two in some high-flying teams that padded their stats on offense. So the undefeated part, because both Rob and from the 860 hit on some things that I want to get into later in this podcast. But Andrew, is undefeated a non-negotiable for you?
Yeah, it is. We're going to get into, like Stefan said, some other kind of conversations here. We already invoked the name 2019 LSU. Like we've already said them. Like they beat, I think, 7 top 10 teams in that road. So like I understand the whole conference realignment makes it harder. Ohio State's going to Seattle this week to play Washington in a Big Ten game, right? Like think about if this game was Maryland, right? I know Maryland's having a nice start to their year, but Ohio State's 20.5 point favorites against Maryland if they're on the road minimum. Like they're still significant. Like the games undeniably got harder. The 12-team playoff undeniably made it more harder to win a national championship, which is why like Ohio State said, like, we had the toughest road to a national championship. Like the next team that wins it, they're going to say we had the toughest road to win the national championship. It's just going to keep going. And then if they go to 16, blah, blah, blah. But one, that's not really my problem. Two, like we are undefeated in or we are having this conversation about undefeated teams being at that level. So how are we going to say, well, because it was harder, we can excuse a loss when like we have examples of teams that, like we said, 2019 LSU, they had probably a harder path than some teams are going to have in a 12-team college football playoff, and they didn't lose. So why are we giving that grace to these teams? So yeah, undefeated was the one that I had on my list. I thought that there was going to be a little pushback there. I'm glad Stefan had that in his list as well, because you have to be undefeated. You cannot lose and then say, especially if it's a loss, because you're going to be favored, especially if it's a loss where it's kind of inexcusable or an upset loss where you're like, oh, we're the greatest college football team of all time. Except for when we lost to that team where we were 10.5-point favorites on the road. Like, just forget that. September 19th, forget that game. Everything else, we were great. So yeah, you have to be undefeated.
But see, even that description you used is why I didn't have undefeated. I understand why. I'm not saying, yes, if you're undefeated, then we're going, whoa, you beat all these different teams. So going back to 2014, all the national champions, Ohio State 14-1. So by your lies' logic, super team, nope. Alabama was 14-1 in 2015, no super team, according to you guys. In 2016, Clemson won the national championship. They were 14-1, 7-1 in the ACC. So no super team for you guys. 2017, Alabama goes 13-1. They're not a super team according to you guys. 2018, Clemson 15-0, the first 15-0 team in college football history. They still are in the running for super team for you guys because they are undefeated. But then there's Bama on the other end of the spectrum where they were 14-1 and 18-0 in the SEC, and they've got some quality numbers. They've got some NFL draft picks. Some of that stuff we'll get into later in this podcast, but their only loss was in the national championship to a team who was still fitting your guys' criteria for a super team. In 2019, LSU 15-0, 8-0 in the SEC. Okay, they're still in the running to be a super team. Clemson 14-1, 8-0 in the ACC. Loss only to LSU in the national championship. But they're not a super team according to you guys. Ohio State 13-1, got to the semifinal. Lost to Clemson, who was the only other team that lost who was in that criteria. So using those teams specifically, that 2018 Alabama team and the 2019 Clemson and Ohio State teams, how much can I dock you because you might not be the only super team in your given season? Because I think the thing about super team is we look at it and we go, okay, this team would win a national championship in X amount of years. If you just plop them in any other season, does this team win the national title? Probably 2019 Ohio State, 2018 Alabama, 2019 Clemson. It just so happens they are playing in a year where there's another team who, if you plot them in any other year, they probably win the national championship. So I didn't want to punish teams because they were birthed in the wrong year. I do think because we do this with the Heisman sometimes, right? Some Heisman fields are better than others, which is why we go, oh, what's the greatest Heisman Trophy winner of all time? You know, there are some years where it's like, yeah, you won the Heisman, but you won it in a weak year versus Joe Burrow won the Heisman Trophy in a year where Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields, and Chase Young were amazing. So that's like the fact that he won by the landslide level that he won emphasizes just how good he was. But I don't think that should take away from what Hurts and Fields and Chase Young were that year. And I wanted to apply that same logic from the teams all the way around. And so for me, those types of teams should still be in the field. I get why they're not, because it's like, well, I mean, you lost to the super team. So, okay, like you got on the field another super team and you lost. It doesn't mean you're not a super team. It just means this super team is better than your super team if we were ranking the top 25 super teams of the past 60 years.
So you would have undefeated as criteria for the more super team.
If we were ranking super teams, yes. Yes.
To be a super team, you can lose to a more super team.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think
fair
that's
enough.
okay.
I get where you're coming from.
We're gonna say the
like,
word super so much on this podcast that it's
We
gonna
are.
sound weird to us by the, you know, like when you say a word a lot, it's gonna be like super. It's just gonna sound very weird at the end.
Yeah, it is. So I guess I'll lead into my next one then, because both of you guys have already given your one. My first one, and it goes back to what the guy from the 860 was talking about with the inevitable, like Thanos and the Avengers. There's got to be a factor to you where it's like, are you sure you want to go down that route with us? Are you sure? Right. And that's where you get, did you really want to get into a shootout with LSU in 2019? Is that really what you wanted to do? Because Andrew, you mentioned they played, it's not like they were shutting teams down, right? The first sign that we saw that, hey, LSU might be a national championship contender was on the road at Texas. And that was a bit of a shootout. We're just better at this than you, right? It wasn't that Texas was terrible. It's just, look, man, we got Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and Justin Jefferson, and you don't, right? You spoke about Georgia in 2021. They weren't lighting up the scoreboard every week, but did you want to get into a defensive stalemate where the game's going to be decided 14-10 with that Georgia team that year? Probably not. Sure, you got teams like 2020 Alabama where it's like, well, I don't care how you want to play. We're going to beat you no matter what. But there's years where, like Michigan, you want to play who can control the run game? Who's going to have a better run game? That's what you want to do? Really? You will run the ball? So that when I think of a super – what'd you say?
I said, never seen how that goes before against Michigan.
That'd
be crazy.
I think of if I'm a football team who's very good at something, let's just use this game that's coming up this weekend, because I mentioned this to you guys when we were walking around the Woody on Tuesday. This idea of, do you think this Washington-Ohio State game on Saturday is going to be a shootout? And I don't know the answer to that right now, but I do know that who's the shootout better for? If you're Ohio State in 2025 and Washington's like, in order to beat you, we got to play this game in the high 30s, low 40s, and Ohio State's got Julian Sand, Jeremiah Smith, and Carnell Tate, they're probably going, okay, good luck, right? Just like how last year's not a good example. They lost the game 13-10. That's not a good example. But I think about that type of stuff. What about, do you have something that's so great that regardless of whatever else is going on with your football team, it doesn't matter because this thing is going to lead you to a win?
So that I'll go into what my second piece of criteria along with undefeated is I labeled it kind of as just like dominant side of the ball. And there you can find stats to back it up, but this goes back to our conversation yesterday with the same thing about what you were saying about what this game's going to unfold like on Saturday. If this Ohio State team this year is going to be a super team, I think one thing that they've shown so far is the defense might just be dominant.
Yeah.
And if it's the thing where it's like Washington's offense is really good and Ohio State's offense is really good. But guess what? Ohio State's offense is going up against Washington's defense. And Washington's offense has to go up against Ohio State's defense. So if you're Washington, you're saying, oh, we want this game to be a shootout. I don't know if you can afford that either, because realistically, how many points you're going to score on this Ohio State defense? Now, what makes this Ohio State team tough is you can't really go into it also thinking like, well, maybe we can beat them in a low scoring game, because it's really hard to slow down this Ohio State offense. But like Texas, if you told them, hey, you're going to hold Ohio State's offense to 14 points, you feel pretty good about yourself? Yeah, probably. And then now we learned that Ohio State's got a really elite, superb defense that's ready to get after it. And that's the thing is, like, we're going to go through some of these examples of super teams in the playoff era where no matter what approach you took to this game, you knew that this guy or this side of the ball was going to do its job. You could only limit them so much, whether that be a Georgia defense, an LSU offense, whatever it might be. You knew going into a game, this area was going to deliver. The other side of the ball, we'll see what they look like. But if you want to go in a shootout, this offense will deliver. If you want to play a low-scoring game, guess what? This defense is going to beat you, make you question if you want to be here still. So that's the type of approach where I just labeled it as kind of like dominant side of the ball. And you could go through and look at stats. I looked at yards per play for some of the super teams of the past decade or so, how they kind of stacked up nationally. I know one of the texters you mentioned there, Stephen, talked about ranking number one in offense or defense. And that's relative. There's sometimes you have a team like an App State will rank number one in offense. It's like, okay, well, yeah, but if Clemson's right behind them at number two, that's fine. That's good enough to consider them. So whatever stat, whatever measurement you want to use, I kind of just labeled it as like dominant side of the ball. You know that this area is going to deliver no matter what, because they are just that dominant.
From the 614, I think a key component of a super team is that at least one side of the ball is incredibly dominant, so much so that they make some good teams look bad. That's what LSU was doing in 2019, right? That's what Georgia was doing in 21 and 22. To be honest with you, I know Ohio State had its flaws in 2021, but the offense did often make some teams look bad. It's just their defense was the offense wasn't great enough to overcome the defense. The same way that I think LSU in 2019, their defense was fine. It wasn't special. It was fine in 2019. Their defense ranked tied for 29th in the country in yards per play allowed on defense, 5.111, but their offense 7.89 yards per play was second. So it balanced itself out here. So to the point of the top five things, again, going back, I was able to go back to 2016 with this one. CFB stats is failing me in this one, but Clemson in 2018, third in offensive yards per play, 7.35. Second in defense, 4.19. Clemson in 2019, which is, again, why I can't take them off the list because they lost to a team who was more super than them. Fourth in yards per play, 7.38 offensively. Defensively, third in yards per play allowed, 4.46. And then Georgia in 2021 was fourth offensively at 6.98. second defensively in 4.15. And then Ohio State last season, third offensively, 6.95, and first defensively, 4.19. So they were dominant. It's just someone's got to lose football games and somebody's got to win football games, which is where maybe it's more difficult in an expanded playoff to stay undefeated. But I understand why you guys go down that road here. Steph, a couple more, though, from the 7-4-0 offense and defense in the top 10 and one in the top 5. From the 7-4-0 top 5 scoring offense and defense, plus a Heisman Trophy finalist. Andrew, does the Heisman Trophy part of it, going back again to the national champions in the college football playoff era, Derrick Henry at Alabama in 2015 won the Heisman Trophy. Joe Burrow at LSU in 2019 wins the Heisman Trophy. Devontae Smith in 2020 at Alabama wins the Heisman Trophy. Does the Heisman matter in the super team conversation?
Yes. I had Heisman Trophy finalists as top 4. You need to have somebody in the top 4. That was one of my criteria. I think there's 2 types of Heisman Trophy finalists in this realm, at least as I saw it. Number 1, you have a guy like Joe Burrow. You have a guy like Devontae Smith, right? It's all right, superheroes, right? Like those are dudes where you look at and go, when it comes down to it, our guy's better than your guy. Can't beat him. Like that to me was kind of a signification of like we could talk about like sides of the ball and like yards per play and things like that. But like, so many of these games come down to a player makes a play or a player makes plays, plural. And I think 2019 LSU with Burrow, 2020 Bama with Devontae Smith and Mac Jones, I think that qualifies. 2019 Ohio State, I mean, they had Justin Fields and Chase Young, right? Like they would have qualified for this too. So, you need to have that level of guy in the top 4. But there's also another type of Heisman finalist, which I think is indicative of a super team, where it's just kind of this team collectively, like the whole thing is so good that we don't really know what to do with it. So here's a guy, here's a representative from the team, right? It's like think of like sending like someone to like the United Nations meeting where it's just like, hey, here's our representative from this. Like this is our main guy. Like we're sending this person. And I went back and looked, and people, I mean, look, I was 5 years old during this season, but people say that 2001 Miami was one of the best college football teams of all time, if not the best. Their Heisman Trophy finalist was not one of the dudes who like had a super successful NFL career. It was Ken Dorsey. And Ken Dorsey just kind of steered that ship. And Georgia had Stetson Bennett as a guy who was a Heisman finalist. He finished 4th, and they had a guy just kind of steer that ship. But that's valuable too. And that is indicative to me of your team is so good that somebody's got to go. So I did have Heisman Trophy finalists because I think it represents 2 different categories here, because there's more than one way to be a super team. And, especially for the Heisman finalist, I think it gives you kind of a look into what that team is. And that's why you must have somebody in the top 4 of the Heisman Trophy conversation.
So looking back, and again, these are people who have won a championship, because I think that's where the list starts. It didn't have to end there, because I've already listed some teams who didn't win the national championship who I think could fit the category. 2015, as I mentioned, Derrick Henry wins the Heisman Trophy for Alabama. In 2016, nobody goes for Ohio State to New York. Marcus Mariota wins that year. There's no finalists for Ohio State. In 2016, Deshaun Watson finishes 2nd for the Heisman Trophy voting. Okay, so he fits the building. In 2017, Alabama wins the national championship, but nobody gets to New York for them. In fact, they don't even have a top 10 finisher that year. So that was really Alabama's just really good at football, but we don't know why. I think it's just all of you guys. But to your point, guys like Stetson Bennett, sometimes they can just go to the quarterback as a default person. In 2018, Clemson wins the national championship. Travis Etienne finishes 7th, so he doesn't get to New York, but he's at least a top 10 finisher for the Heisman Trophy. They only took 3 that year. That's the last time they didn't take 4 to New York. 2019, Joe Burrow wins the Heisman Trophy. Clemson, who I have on my list, doesn't get anybody there, but Justin Fields and Chase Young finished 3rd and 4th, and then J.K. Dobbins finishes 6th. So 3 of the top 6 were Ohio State football players. I don't know, man. That sounds like a super team to me. They just ran into other super teams. In 2020, Alabama, Devontae Smith wins the award. Mac Jones gets there and finishes third. You got 2 Heisman Trophy finalists and one of them wins it. That's super team material. 2021, Georgia doesn't get anybody to New York, but Jordan Davis at defensive tackle finishes 9th, which was a ode to, I think that dude was like 6 in snaps on Georgia that year because you rotate on the defensive tackle when you have depth there. But he's so dominant that he finishes 9th. In 2022, Georgia repeats, as Andrew already mentioned. Stetson Bennett finished 4th for the Heisman Trophy. I think that was an 0-2 in 2 years. Georgia lost 1 game in 30 go-ats, and they won a national title that year. But also, he was very good. I don't want to take that away from him. In 2023, you have Michigan as their national champion. Nobody gets to New York, but Blake Corum finishes 9th, and J.J. McCarthy finishes 10th. So you got top 5. Doesn't quite fit Andrew's top 4 get to New York, but at least they did get some votes for it. And then last season, Ohio State, nobody finished in the top 10. Though this is funny, Kyle McCord finished 10th for Syracuse. But I do wonder, and we'll get into that when I get back to my next one. But I wonder if Will Howard, if he beats Michigan, does he get a top 10 finish? He probably doesn't get to New York unless he beats Dylan Gabriel, but I do think maybe he finishes in the top 10. But Stefan, Heisman.
I considered it. The Will Howard thing is interesting because he probably, if he had beaten Michigan, maybe would have been in the conversation. Then I think that game against Oregon in the Big Ten title game would have, I think the winner of that game probably, it might have finished in the top 4 and made it to New York, right? If he beats Dylan Gabriel in the rematch after having beaten Michigan, but again, these are all hypotheticals, and we cover the Big Ten, not the SEC, so we don't have to go down that route completely. I considered the Heisman thing. I ended up not going with it. I can see the reason I wanted to include it is because I talk about there's one dominant side of the ball being one of my criteria of just like that side of the ball will deliver every single game for you, regardless of how that game's going to go. And I thought, what if you have a player who is just going to deliver and you are not going to lose because he will put the team on his back every single time he has to? And that's where some of these guys, all those names that you mentioned, those are all guys that did that, right? But the reason I wound up not going down that route is because sometimes I think there are teams that win because they just have a great quarterback. And there are obvious flaws on the other aspects that kind of make you think, man, they really benefited from having this dude at the most important position. But there are a lot of other holes on the roster that make you think that they can be exposed in a lot of different ways if you can find ways to just put pressure on the quarterback or something like that. So I wound up not going the Heisman route because for me, the super team discussion extended beyond, hey, I don't want to just bail this team out because they had one great player. And that's where the Joe Burrow thing is interesting in 2019 because Joe Burrow had arguably the greatest single season ever in college football history, right? Like if you were to say you get one quarterback on your team to play tomorrow, you were saying 2019 Joe Burrow. I think very fair answer, right? Cam Newton, here's the year at Alabama. I'm sure you could find a year at like Tim Tebow, his career in totality, but he did also have good individual single seasons. But it's why when we talk about Tim Tebow and Joe Burrow, it's like two different conversations where it's like Burrow's one of the greatest, Tebow's one of the greatest college football players of all time. Burrow might have had 2019 Burrow might be better than any single year of Tim Tebow, right? It's this different conversation. So, but the reason 2019 LSU is kind of this exception because they had Burrow, but they also had a lot around Burrow on both sides of the ball that you could say, okay, there weren't a lot of holes in this team to expose. Where this is going to be a bad example because this team is not even in the super team conversation, but Jaden Daniels' LSU team, that's a team that won some games simply because Jaden Daniels was a dog, right? But that team had so many flaws, right? Like when Caleb Williams won, if they had won that, they lost the Pac-12 title game to Utah. If they had won that game, they would have made the playoff. But that was a bad USC team, a bad defense that got bailed out because their quarterback was just incredible, right? And that's kind of something I took into account. Is we've seen a lot of college football teams look better than they actually are just because they have a Heisman caliber type guy at quarterback, and I didn't want that to be kind of part of this super team discussion.
From the 513, you have to have at least one person in New York. 2 candidates would definitely be helpful to the super team case, but I get where you're coming from. The Heisman depending on sometimes you're the quarterback of the best team in college football. Sometimes it's because you're a superhero. And for 2.5 months, you had to be a superhero. And sometimes your superhero meant you won, i.e. Cam Newton. Sometimes it meant you lost, i.e. Caleb Williams. And then there's other times where you're the superhero, but you're also part of the Justice League, i.e. Joe Burrow in 2019. So what is your next category then? What's your next criteria? Because Andrew's got 2 right now. I've got 1 listed, and you have 1 listed.
So along with and maybe this is kind of a subcategory to undefeated, but I'm just putting it as its own third category. There has to be some, and I don't know what the exact number is. That's why I kind of went back and forth on, but double-digit wins were important to me. Where not only are you going through the schedule and winning games, but you're just dominating anyone who's standing in your way, right? Like you're going into tough environments and just pummeling a team. You're teams are coming to your place and they don't stand a chance. That was one thing to me too that mattered is, having close wins. Obviously, win's a win, and if you walk out of there with a win, you go undefeated. That's fine. But along the way, do you just look far superior to anyone you face? Ranked opponent, don't care. Beat them by 20. There's some teams that have pummeled teams in the playoff. I mean, we saw Ohio State go through some teams in the playoff last year where you could see why a team like that would be part of a super team discussion, right? Like there is an element to just not just winning, but doing it in a dominant fashion that separates you from a great college football team to a super team.
I'm going to use yours to build on one of mine too, because I feel like yours is like kind of like a leave no doubt concept, which
heard that before.
Yeah, shout out to the Monday Pod. From the 9-5-1, I think a super team non-negotiable would be beating your rival, undefeated Big Ten/conference champion in the Natty, also leading in at least yards per game or points per game. A few others from our texters. From the 9-2-5, one core element of being a super team is whether you're a player. Okay, well, actually, I'll save that one. Sorry, I'm going to save that one. Here's my second one. Super teams don't get in their own way, like period. And you are not allowed to lose to your rival. And maybe that's because we get to cover the biggest rivalry in sports, that we place a level of emphasis on that, to where if we were covering USC and our big rivalries were USC Notre Dame, USC UCLA, I'm not saying we wouldn't value the rivalry, but it's not like the culturalistic part of it isn't quite the same as Ohio State just won a national championship and yet their rivals going, yeah, but like the entire reason they won a national title is because they lost to Michigan, and it spurred the greatest run we've seen from a team in 4 games straight, right? So we have to take that into account. You are not allowed to do that. And so I went and looked. There have been 2 national champions in the college football playoff era who have lost to their rival. So Ohio State last year went 14-2, 6-2 in the Big Ten. Didn't even get to the Big Ten championship game. And then Alabama in 2017 lost to Auburn. And it was their only loss that year. Still getting to the playoff, still won the SEC, still won a national championship. But you lost to your rival. And that's the biggest rivalry in sports and the second biggest rivalry in college football. I don't think you should be allowed to lose that game. We go, oh, we can put you on the same pedestal as the other 8 teams over the past decade, if my math is correct, who did beat their rival and win a national, especially since, for me, expansion means grace, right? If this were 24 months ago, Ohio State losing to Michigan, they wouldn't have had a chance to have the run that they just went on and won a national championship. Okay, in 2017, if that were 4 years prior, Alabama wouldn't have had. Actually, no, I think Alabama won a national championship a year they lost, but they played Auburn, so that's not. But you know what I'm saying? Like those types of losses don't burn you anymore. So I do think in these conversations they have to burn you. So not allowed, Andrew. You lose to your rival. I don't care if you were number 1 in yards per play offensive, number 2 in defense. You were number 1 in the talent composite, and you had 19 guys drafted, and 6 of them went in the first round, and you won every game by 3 scores. If the game you lost is at the end of the season to your rival, I don't want to hear it from you.
So, I mean, I had undefeated. So, like, I have, you can't lose to your non-rivals. You can't lose to anybody. Like, if you're Virginia Tech, you can't lose to, I mean, I know hilarious to use Virginia Tech, but like, you can't lose to Virginia. But I also have like, hey, you can't lose to Old Dominion, which they did. So like,
shame on you for losing to that G5 school.
Yeah. So it's like,
but I think that fits
like,
the category because that's the Stefan's point, right? That's like dominance on both ends
right.
of the spectrum there.
So yeah, and I do think you're not wrong when you say that, this is, I think like, let me put myself in the mindset of somebody who did not have like undefeated on their list. I do think you're in the ballpark there with, the rivalry being Ohio State centric, because like, think about the rivalries across college football right now that are just kind of like fading. Like, imagine for 2 seconds if Ohio State or Michigan were like, hey guys, with this new era of college football, maybe we shouldn't play each other every year. Imagine that. Like Oklahoma, and I know it's the biggest rivalry in sports, so it's a little different, but like Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, they're not going to play every year. Like you mentioned Notre Dame and USC, they're not going to play every year. Like,
well, like because there's one coach who's scared.
Yeah, right. But that's kind of the thing. So I do think in the Ohio State sense, yes, like you have to beat Michigan, but I still think in like other senses, like the rivalry, it still has to matter to some degree, because like, go tell people in, Georgia that the Georgia Tech Georgia game just doesn't matter anymore. Like they're going to be upset about that. Like just because it's, oh, well, we are in different conferences and it's a different, no. Georgia Tech wants to beat the snot out of Georgia every year and vice versa. So the rival point, I didn't have it. I mean, like I said, I did have undefeated, but I do think that it's not crazy to suggest, even for like a non-Ohio State audience.
Yeah, let me ask you this question, Stephen, to kind of piggyback off that. Also, we got a hilarious comment from Caleb in the YouTube chat of saying Columbus and Ann Arbor would be scary places if that ever happened. I think that's in reference to the rivalry being canceled.
Oh yeah,
and obviously for non-COVID purposes. So in the new era of things, Stephen, the changing format of the playoff, would your exception be if you play a rival again and beat them? Or if you, in some capacity, you go 1-1 against your rival. Let's say Ohio State wins at Michigan this year, or Michigan beats Ohio State this year, and then in Indy, Ohio State beats them.
Yeah. I and you know what? It's something I want to explore later this year, because it's going to happen at some point, right? Ohio State and Michigan are going to play each other, and they're going to play each other again, and they might even play each other 3 times that year, right?
Back to the point, Columbus and Ann Arbor would be scary places.
It's just, that's stressful to think about, man. If it happens this year, I'm going to write a story saying bring back divisions, so this can't happen anymore. I think we have to decide, now that we're in this expanded field, which one is going to be the game. You know what I'm saying? Because that's a lot of emotional toll. I mean, let's hypothetical this real quick. Ohio State plays in Michigan on November 29th. But we already know that regardless of what happens here, well, let's just say we don't know, because that makes it more fun. Let's just say that Ohio State's undefeated in Big Ten play and Michigan has a loss. But a Michigan win would mean Michigan would jump somebody until now. These are the 2 teams who are playing again the next week. And we're like, okay, that was a lot. And now we got to do this again in 7 days. Oh. And let's just say Ohio State wins the rematch. So they're 1-1. And then we're headed to the Fiesta Bowl for a semifinal, and we're all excited to go to Camelback Hotel. Watch a good playoff game, and it's like, oh, wait, Michigan's going to be there too. So we got to do this again.
I would lose 2 years of my life and 2 inches off my hairline if that happens.
I just don't want that. I think I want that, but I don't think you really want that.
Our
I think
columnist, Jimmy Watkins, our columnist and rivalry reporter, would gain 5 years of his life.
He would be able to retire with the number of clicks that he would get and the bonus.
I think business-wise, as a company man, I would love that. As a man who is all about self-care, I don't actually want that. I don't want that. But I think because of that, to get back to my point, I think we got to decide which one is about the rivalry and which one is about, trying to win a national championship. Because there's one that's guaranteed to happen every year, and it's you work that 365 days a week. You put so much stress into that I think it's hard to match that energy. I just think it's a different level of energy. So in this scenario, to answer your question, I think I would put it on the one that happens in the regular season, and then we'll deal with the other ones if they get there.
Yeah, and we could have a conversation even in general of like what a redemption loss would mean for a super team. Like I would maybe be open to pivoting from the undefeated thing if it was like if last year Ohio State went 15-1 or whatever it would have been, but two of the like they went 2-1 against Oregon or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I would be maybe more open to the idea of if you didn't go undefeated, but your loss you later redeemed. Maybe I would be open to it. I guess that's a world I guess we'll live in when we get there.
I like that. So from the 614, 4+ first round draft picks and 12 or more total. And then from the 419, I think they have to have a lot of draft picks and a good amount of them have to be successful. That's something that gets proven later down the line. And then from the 925, one core element of being a super team is whether your players have long-term success at the next level, not just having guys drafted that fizzle out, but guys that go to the league and have long, profitable careers, barring injury. Honestly, the 2014 Buckeyes fit that bill. There were a bunch of studs that had long-term careers in the league, like Ezekiel Elliott. Did anybody? I had a draft thing on mine. Did anybody else have a draft thing?
I thought about it. I'm out of criteria though because I followed the rules.
Well, this is my last one. I like finagled it to get 3.
So I thought about it. The thing that I was kind of running into was that like sometimes draft picks are not the result of a specific team. Like Ohio State, their 2003 draft was not crazy. Their 2004 draft after the 2003 season was the one where like they had 14 draft picks, I think, right? Like Georgia didn't go undefeated in 2021. They did in 2022, but the 2022 NFL draft in April of 22 was the one where they had 15 draft picks, right? So that was the holdup for me, was looking at it and going, draft picks don't always happen in the immediacy after that, right? Like Ohio State this year was, Michigan the year before was, but it doesn't always happen like that. Like sometimes you just got a bunch of dudes who either come back or are not draft eligible.
Yeah, it probably takes time. Like, for example, if we're counting, first round picks from last year's Ohio State team, you look at the 2025 draft and you say they had, was it 4? Was it 4
Yep.
first round picks? You say, okay, they had 4 first round picks from that team. Well, actually, they had 6 if you count Caleb this upcoming year, JJ the year after, and at least 6, I should say, because Caden McDonald played a decent role on that team. Sonny Styles played a big role on that team. He could be a first round pick, So there's other, like, what if Jermaine Matthews or David Benos? And yeah, I did that for you. Arvell Reese played a massive role on Amy. He's looking like a first round pick. So
yeah,
that's kind of another element to it. I'm okay with counting NFL draft picks, but you have to be open to the idea that it's not just the immediate NFL draft that counts.
I think the reason why I included it is often those players who get drafted have the biggest impact. And to Andrew's point, there are years where maybe a team won it a year earlier than maybe people were expecting. So all those guys are pretty young, right? That's what 2014 Ohio State was, which is why they only had 5 guys drafted. Because it's like, well, that's because all their impact players are back on the roster next year. And then in 2015, they had 12 guys drafted. They had 5 first-round draft picks. Alabama in 2015, that 2016 draft had 7 players drafted, 1 first-round draft pick. Clemson, after the 2016 season, had 6 players drafted, 2 first-round draft picks. In 2017, after that national championship, Alabama had 12 players drafted, 4 in the first round. 2018, Clemson's team had 6 draft picks, 3 in the first round. LSU, this is where I think the uptick is why, like Andrew, this is becoming a more prominent thing. LSU in 2019, 14 guys drafted, 5 in the first round, Clemson that year had 7 guys drafted, 2 in the first round, and Ohio State had 10 drafted and 3 in the first round. In 2020, Alabama had 10 drafted, 6 in the first round. That's ridiculous. Ohio State, after that 2020 season, had 10 players drafted, 1 in the first round. And then I included Clemson as well. 5 drafted, 2 in the first round. 2021's Georgia team had 15 guys drafted, 5 in the first round. 22 Georgia had 10 drafted, 3 in the first round. Michigan had 13 drafted, 1 in the first round. And Ohio State 14 drafted, 4 in the first round that got drafted as well. Okay, so that's everybody's criteria except for one basic thing that nobody said on their list outright, but I mean, Stefan and Andrew kind of hinted at it with the fact that they said undefeated. From the 7-1-6, super teams need to be in the conference title more often than not and doesn't lose to opponents who they outmatch. From Kevin in the 847, for me, a super team needs to win or tie their conference, win their conference championship game, have a single loss or be undefeated for the season. The single loss would need to be by 7 points or less, and then win the national championship.
Yeah, so I only gave 2. I only had 2, so that was my third. I like obviously the national title I feel like is its own thing.
Sure.
But like I included the national title, but like, yeah, you have to win your conference. Like 2021 Georgia didn't. Like I'm sorry. Like I think you have to be able to say, not like if we're gonna put super team, one of the best teams of a generation, one of the best teams of an era, one of the best teams of a decade, whatever. You can't say like we weren't the best team in our conference that year, or we couldn't beat the best team in the conference that year, or because like, you know, what happens if we're in a situation like that where like Ohio State doesn't make the conference championship game? They have 1 loss. They lose to, you know, or they lose to Michigan in the conference championship game. Let's say, you know, it's 1-1, and then you don't play Michigan again. And then all of a sudden you're split. And it's like, well, you didn't win the conference. You lost you beat Michigan, and then you lost to Michigan a week later. So it just, the waters get muddied. So yeah, you have to win the natty, obviously, but like, you have to win your conference too. I'm sorry. Like, I know I had undefeated on there, but like, I felt that conference championship was important to stay because, you know, winning your conference, it still matters.
PJ in the PJ Studio is asking how many guys from that 2015 Ohio State team got drafted. 12 with 5 in the first round. So to that point of you had to wait a year for that payoff, PJ, that's what we're talking about here. Stefan, I think I'm going to hit on the point you just said. Georgia didn't win their conference because they lost in the conference championship game to the team that they then beat in the national championship. Now, there's context. Jamison Williams and John Mechie were in street clothes, so that matters. But still, I think that plays into your point of redeeming the loss can sometimes, I don't want to say wipe away, but make it okay that maybe you lost this game earlier in the season, especially if you redeem it in a similar situation, neutral field with a trophy on the line.
Yeah, no, you're right. That's not what I was smirking about, though. I was smirking because I want Gillis to admit that Notre Dame can never be a super team now.
Oh, yeah, they can't. They can't do it.
That's a good line, actually. That
your
is
criteria,
true.
not my criteria. True. That's your criteria.
That is true.
Can't do it.
Well, they could be the best independent team in college football.
That's not. They're already the best.
1v1 versus UConn. Let's see.
Yeah, they're already the best.
Go Huskies.
So to end, there's only been 2 who did not win their conference championship over the last decade, and that's Georgia 2021 and then Ohio State 2024. Ohio State is the only one who didn't at least play in their conference championship game that year. I think that's the only one. Yeah, that's the only ones. Okay, let's transition here. We typically would do an ad read here, but we don't. I don't know how to do that live because we're learning on the fly. So instead, let's do this. Oh, the YouTube is already doing the ad for us. Look at that, man. I like how YouTube plays. Okay. Candidates for this season that you think can be in the conversation. Let's save Ohio State for last because we covered them, and so we can go the deepest, that have the deepest dive about them. I'm going to throw Miami up there first. And it's because they've already started to build the resume. They've got the win over Notre Dame, which was a top 5 win. And I understand Notre Dame has fallen because they played 2 top 20 teams to start their season and whatnot. But like, I'm not going to devalue that for Notre Dame because for Miami, when Miami's part of the reason Notre Dame has fallen in the rankings, right? It's not like they played them. This is not LSU playing Clemson in week 1. And then Clemson, we found out later, is not that good against teams who are not as good as LSU is. This is Notre Dame is 1 and 2. Their 2 losses are the 2 top 20 teams, and one of which is Miami. I think Miami's got some juice to them a little bit. And there's been a bit of a build-up with Mario Cristobal. I think they knocked on the door last year with what they had, and they've kind of reloaded and also gotten old at quarterback once again. I think Miami should be in the conversation for super team right now.
I'm open to the idea of Miami. I like it. I think that the way they play in the trenches is so different than Miami teams we've seen recently. What they did against Notre Dame. Listen, could I have predicted that Miami was going to beat Notre Dame? Sure. Did I think it was going to happen because they were just going to dominate them at the line of scrimmage? No, I would have never thought that. So I'm all in on Miami being a candidate.
And the thing about Miami is I went and looked at the talent composite, the 247 talent composite, which is just a roundup of like, hey, how many star players do you have from a recruiting ranking standpoint? The only team who have not been in the top 5 over the last decade and have won a national title. 2016, Clemson was 9th in the talent composite. 2018, Clemson was 6th in the talent composite. Even LSU was in the top 5. They were 5th. And Michigan in 2023 was 14th in the talent composite. Now, they had the type of recruit that nobody could match. That's a man by the name of Connor Stallions. But listen, you went.
By the way, I was gonna say earlier, 2023 Michigan met a lot of the super team criteria, and I think there's one thing that keeps one very valid thing that keeps them from the super team conversation. Like,
you're right, they didn't have a Heisman Trophy finalist.
That's what it was. People don't talk about 2023 Michigan when they talk about super teams, and they fit all my criteria: undefeated, dominant side of the ball. Like, you knew that defense was going to win every game for them, regardless of what the offense did. And most of their wins were by double digits. They had 4 wins by single digits, and they won their playoff games by 7 and 21. So, like, shouldn't have cheated. You would have fit all the criteria.
They were 4th in yards per play allowed and 35th in yards per play offensively. To the point Miami is 15th this year in the talent composite. So they would, when you're talking about teams who are on the outside looking in from an overall talent standpoint and turning less than into something greater than, that's the world that Miami would be living in, the Michigan world, but without a Connor Stallions. At least right now, we'll see, because that's a new thing in college football.
You never know.
That's my first one. Gillis, who's your first? Who you got? Name another team.
Well, I also had Miami, so I think you're on board there. I have Oregon. I think Oregon kind of fits that billing. I think when you it's easy to kind of look at these schedules and say like, oh, well, they don't play anyone until blank, or oh, they don't have a big moment until blank. Oregon's schedule kind of looks a little more difficult than maybe we thought going into the year. Obviously Oklahoma State, in part because of what Oregon did, fired Mike Gundy. They won by 66 points, and maybe Mike Gundy shouldn't have started talking about Oregon's NIL. But they won that game by 66. They play Penn State this weekend. Obviously, everybody knows how big that game is, but Oregon, they go into Happy Valley and win that game. They come out of it and they play Indiana right after that. And Indiana, I think they play Iowa this weekend. I don't know who they play the following week, but Indiana might be a top 10 game when they host Indiana. USC is currently undefeated, and I know we'll see what USC does. Their middle of the schedule is very difficult, but they're 4-0. And then they end the year with Washington. And obviously we can talk about Washington, and we have talked about Washington a lot with Ohio State playing them. But Washington looks like a really solid team. So the schedule, I think, for them to be considered the super team of just, hey, would they beat this team on the road? They might go into one of the tougher environments in college football, which is a Penn State whiteout, and win. If you do that, and then you play a top 10 Indiana team and win, and you go down the line and win, and then you got maybe a Heisman Trophy finalist or a Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback and Dante Moore, unsolicited gambling advice for anybody out there watching or listening. If you think Oregon's going to win the game, just bet on Dante Moore to win the Heisman Trophy, because his odds are going to skyrocket if they win that game. So, Dante Moore is one of the more talented quarterbacks in the sport. They've got a good defense. Lanning's a great coach. I think Oregon's in that mix as well.
Oregon's 5th on the talent composite entering the year, and they got talent on both sides. They got a young defense, but I think Oregon, I got a coach fired, so I guess that counts for something. But this weekend, we're going to know a lot more about Oregon. And I think what we know right now, I think there's still a bit of a theory in the way that maybe some other teams aren't, Stefan, because they haven't had an opportunity to play a top-ranked team yet.
Mhm.
Stefan, who's another? We've said Oregon, we've said Miami. We said all the favorites on this pod.
Yeah, I mean, I'll venture. I'll go down lower on my list just to venture off the obvious. I'm using my criteria, right? Double-digit wins, dominant at least on one side of the ball, undefeated. I'm going with Florida State. I mean, say what you will about Alabama. I know we walked out of that game and it was a lot of, talking smack online about Alabama and how much, they've fallen off with Kalen DeBoer. Florida State's got one of the best offenses in the country in terms of yards per play. I think they're second in the country right now in yards per play. They've got after the Alabama game, they've beaten the brakes off of everyone they played. Obviously not the greatest of competition, but if it's my criteria, double-digit wins, looking dominant. Like they're doing everything right now that fits my criteria. Now, do I think they'll maintain that? We'll see. I think one of the things we talk about is like what stands in a team's way to be a super team. I think Tommy Castellanos has had an awesome start to the season. His passing ability, or maybe lack thereof at times, does concern me. I feel like that could lead to some losses and you fall off of the super team conversation. But you have to, if we're projecting, how does someone end up being a super team, right? I think because of what Florida State did last year, we kind of forget that they are traditionally really good. They're usually in the top 15 in the country. They're recruiting well. They've done well in the transfer portal this offseason. They are still one of the prominent programs in college football, right? Like they're not an Indiana that out of nowhere is playing well, right? Like this is Florida State that we're talking about here. So if everything pans out, things have to go perfectly for you to be a super team, frankly, right? But I think if they play through the schedule and keep playing the way that they've been playing, yeah, they can absolutely end up being in this conversation. So to venture off the normal path, I'll go with Florida State.
They are 19th in the talent composite to start the year. I love how Florida State and Clemson have traded places.
Yeah, me too.
I'm going to venture off the path too. They're 72nd on the talent composite. And they just beat a team 63-10. What
it's
if?
Indiana?
It's Indiana, man. It's Indiana. Always has been.
What if? I'm just saying, what if?
I mean, listen, a 53-point win, if you continue down that path, you will be considered a super team.
Who else has a 53-point win over a top 10 team right now?
Do you feel more confident about I imagine the answer is yes, but about their ability to compete with the Penn States and the Oregons this year? Obviously, Ohio State's not on their schedule. They would be in that conversation. But Indiana plays, their three toughest games are at Iowa, at Penn State, and at Oregon. If you think that because of what they did against Illinois suggests that maybe they can pull off some things against Oregon or Penn State, then yeah, they're absolutely in this conversation.
I think it's a good start. I think this was a good start to what they were doing. I just, it's not everything, but it's not nothing either. If that makes sense. That you beat a team by 53 points. Right? And so if you're looking, I guess if you're looking for the who's going to come out of nowhere and be it, and I think you're going to go with, I think Indiana's the most like, what? Because I'm thinking they're not going to be as good as LSU. But I do think that you look at LSU's 2018 season, they were 10-3. They were fine. They weren't like great, but they were fine. And then out of nowhere, they turned into a monster. And they showed it early against Texas. So I'm almost wondering if this Illinois game is Indiana's Texas game. If it's going to happen. I'm presenting a scenario where if it happens. This is the Illinois game was the Texas game for LSU in 2019. And then in hindsight, we're going to go, oh, maybe we should have paid more attention to the fact that Indiana beat a top 10 team by 53 points. They're least likely of the two teams I've said so far. They're the least likely team to do it, obviously, but it's I don't know.
It's a tough conversation. Like even like
Yeah.
we're talking about like Miami and Ohio State. Like even those, like it's tough for them to get to super team level, right? Like things have to go their way. So at some point, something kind of unpredictable has to happen.
Yeah, and the Indiana thing, I think, like obviously I think Indiana has maybe the most to prove of anybody on this list. Like the path is there. You just have the longest way to get there, right? Because like let's
Yeah.
pretend Indiana runs the table. It's like, okay, they would have beaten the snot out of Illinois, and then they go on the road to Kinnick Stadium and they beat Iowa, which is like a historically house of terror for like undefeated top
If
10.
winning at the Swamp still counts for something, then Big Ten teams winning at Iowa still counts for something.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like one of those like danger spots of like winning at Iowa, and then they do go to Oregon, they do go to Penn State. Like their schedule is nightmarish. But I do think they have like the longest way to go in terms of like maybe making up that talent gap. And then like frankly, like Signetti, what he's done is one of the most impressive things ever. But I think what we saw last year that they need to kind of prove against big teams is when they played Ohio State and when they played Notre Dame, I think it was very clear that they went into that game and went, I don't know if we can match up one for one.
Mhm.
And that was why I think Signetti kind of like, this is going to sound bad, but like tuck tail, right? Where it was like, against Ohio State, it felt like he was trying to play to just keep the game close. And against Notre Dame, it felt like Indiana was trying to play to just win the game at the end and keep it close enough to where they could pull it out at the end. Like they've got to kind of prove that they can go toe to toe against the Oregons, against the Penn States, against the teams that are like the true elite, because I don't want to downplay Illinois. I still think Illinois is a good football team and they did just kill them, but we all can admit that there's a difference between Illinois and Ohio State, that there's a difference between Illinois and Oregon. There's a difference between Illinois and Penn State.
Sure, but the problem is, again, when you're looking for who might come out of nowhere and do this, I think you would have said the same thing about LSU in 2019 after they beat Texas. Texas was not what it is now in 2019. They were fine. Maybe they were top 10, maybe they weren't. And we're going to figure that out about Illinois over the next couple of weeks here. But they won that game. It's like, man, good win for LSU. You got Florida, Auburn, Alabama, Ole Miss, and potentially have to play Georgia in a conference championship game. Good luck with that one. That's a crazy schedule to get through. And yet here we are 6 years later, and they're arguably the best team of the 14 college football playoff era, them or Alabama, right? It's in hindsight, we look at LSU as this juggernaut, but they were not viewed as that in the moment. They were viewed as a team who got a really good win over Texas, and it was like, whoa, look at them. They're finally throwing the football to all those elite receivers. Whoa, look at Indiana. They're finally not tucking tail and showing up to actually win these top 10 games. What does that mean, right? That's why I think people in our profession love to talk about things in the perspective of what we know now versus what we knew at that moment. I don't know that on September 24th, not 2019, we knew for sure that LSU was a super team.
I don't think we knew that until they won at Alabama. That's when we started thinking, oh, this is one of the best teams ever.
Yes. So we're not going to know this until November for sure. But if you're looking for little sprinkles, I think winning a game 53-0 with the world, not 53-0, 63-10 with the world watching has to matter a little bit. Now, again, of the teams we've listed so far, and we're going to wrap up here soon because I don't know if we want to keep people here an hour and a half, but of the team we've listed, yes, least likely to be the super team. But of the teams we've listed so far, how many of them can say they played a top 10 opponent and they won by 50 plus points?
Yeah. I think it's other teams that we probably would mention, like the obvious ones, like, Penn State right now is not looked the part. Listen, if they come out and thump Oregon, then yeah, maybe we start having that discussion. Georgia, shaky at Tennessee wasn't always great, but they could start running things here and be part of that conversation. So even with the best of the best, we're projecting a little bit where, do you think right now that 2025 Georgia is as good as 2019 LSU? No, you don't think that. Okay, what about if we get to December and they're still undefeated and then in January they win a national title? And it's like, hey, remember when Buckeye Talk said they were a super team in September?
Okay. Very quickly, any other non-Ohio State teams that people want to mention?
Penn State.
Okay.
It feels like them and Oregon are in the same conversation where whichever
Yeah.
team wins this weekend can maybe start, especially if they win in dominant fashion either way.
Problem is, we don't believe in one of those two teams, unfortunately. But yes, obviously, of any team coming into the season, I think they probably fit the category just because they look like Ohio State and Michigan the last few years in terms of how old they are. But as Stefan wrote at cleveland.com/OSU, being old doesn't mean being better. It just means that you have a floor that's decently high. Unless you're Clemson, then your floor is also decently low. Georgia, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. That was the only other one I had. So let's talk about Ohio State. You have the best player on offense. You have the best player on defense. You have a quarterback who could be, 3 weeks away from us saying, I think he might be the best quarterback in college football, to being able to potentially definitively say that, right? I think right now there's a part of Julian saying that's still a theory, but I don't know if he's going to complete 78% of his passes all year, but if he's 71+% completion percentage, he's throwing 3 touchdowns a game and for 275 every single game, and Ohio State's dominating, I think you'll start putting him in that conversation. This defense might be the best defense in college football. Who knew, man? Who knew? Carnell Tate catches everything. The offensive line is not a problem. I do not think the offensive line is a strength, but it's not a problem. You're figuring out your running back situation. And so if we use our criteria of there's something inevitable about you, well, the inevitable thing is we have Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith, Max Clare, Brandon Ennis, and a dude who can sling it. That's the inevitable. But also, who knows? Matt Patricia might be an inevitable. Who knows? NFL draft.
Caleb Downs and rivalries might be the inevitable.
That's what I'm saying. Like, everybody is inevitable. Super teams don't get in their way. Ryan Day hasn't gotten in his way yet, right? The Michigan thing that's not a getting in your way thing. That's a Michigan problem thing. But he hasn't lost a game they're not supposed to lose yet. They're still undefeated, so let's see how that plays out. I think that's the long game. Somebody on this team is going to New York. Is that fair to say?
Feels like it. It feels almost like maybe 2023 Michigan, where they have like 3 guys in the top 10, but none of them go to New York. I don't know.
Somebody's going to New York, Andrew.
Or somebody's are going to.
Mateer got hurt, so he's out. So the field is wide open. Fernando Mendoza has the highest Heisman odds right now, and that's because he just beat a team by 53 points. So somebody's going to New York. And you're right, Andrew. Maybe it's a somebody's. So far, we have no doubts about Ohio State. We have questions. We don't have doubts. And I guess we'll see what happens on November 29th. But I do think the thing that gets in their way is Michigan still stuck in their head, or is Julian saying not as good as we thought? And I can only wrap my head around one of those two things happening. And it ain't the one about the quarterback in Carlsbad.
Yeah. When I wrote down things that could be in Ohio State's way, rivalry was obviously the number one thing. The Julian saying thing was up there. There is also like the defensive tackle situation still remains kind of an interesting. It just remains an interesting conversation because it's the one thing on this defense that remains kind of a question. Mm-hmm. And is there a team that could take advantage of it? And we thought maybe Texas was the perfect team to take it. Basically, what I'm saying with this defense, if there are questions left with this defense, it centers around what if Texas offenses was just really bad. Mm-hmm. And maybe what we thought a preseason number 1 team could expose some things. Maybe it's actually Washington that ends up exposing some things on this defense, or maybe it's maybe Illinois gets healthy and they can expose some things on this defense, right? Maybe Penn State can expose. I don't know, because that's like the one question left with this defense is we think they are elite. I think they are elite. I think they're the best defense in the country, but I do leave open a door of maybe no one's been able to poke holes in it yet because Texas just isn't what we thought they were. Maybe. And that's just nitpicking, obviously. But
then the problem becomes, does it matter? Right. I mean, LSU, here's their scores. At Texas, they won 45-38. Northwestern State 65-14. Vanderbilt 66-38. Florida 42-28. Auburn 23-20. Alabama without Tua 46-41. At Ole Miss 58-37. Arkansas 56-20. Oklahoma 63-28. Clemson 42-20. Right, they weren't winning games 55-7 every week.
Right.
So you're right. Maybe Ohio State's not perfect. It doesn't mean you're not super. And the question becomes, can somebody take advantage of your imperfection? Because if not, it really doesn't matter if, oh no, we ran up the middle against Ohio State. Oh, there goes JJ catching another 40-yard bomb. Oh no, we averaged 6.7 yards per game. Oh, there's Carnell Tate. He's catching another one. Julian Sanders completed 75% of his passes today. Right, so that's which goes back to the inevitable part for me. Who has the most inevitability about their roster? And I think it's right now, bar none, either Ohio State or Miami. It's Ohio State on the perimeter or it's Miami in the trenches. And that is the conclusion of why we will be in South Florida watching the Hurricanes against Ohio State, talking about the last time these two teams played in the national championship in 2002. And here we are again with those two playing. Thank you for coming to our live, first ever Buckeye Talk Live Show. We're going to do this every single Wednesday. We talk super teams this week. I can't wait to see what we talk next week. Next up, we're deep diving into Washington for the Ohio State-Washington game preview coming at you. That should be a lot of fun, I think, because now we're not talking hypotheticals. It's like real ball talk. Because it's, Big Ten play. It's not, what happens if they lose? Is the world going to fall down? Or is it, hey, are they going to win by 40 or are they going to win by 400? No, we can have like real conversations about that. But every week, every Wednesday at noon, come join us. Come hang out for an hour and just come hear us talk about nonsense. We had some other stuff we wanted to talk about, but I'm not going to hold you guys for 90 minutes on the live. So we'll get into it tomorrow. Get the text 614-350-3315, 2-week free trial. It's $3.99 after that. I think there's a link right here. I think you can click this link. And if you can't, we'll work on it. This is our first time doing this. It's a lot of fun. You guys have fun? This was worth it.
I like it. I enjoy everyone hopping in on the comments. Sawyer, I'm so sorry that you have a wedding this weekend. That's cool. That's just brutal.
Also, I've seen Miami boys a few times, which I did appreciate. I have liked those. Comments. So yeah, like Steven said the other day, we need to learn YouTube lingo. So smash that subscribe button.
Yeah, man. 614-350-3315. It's a 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that. For Stefan, Krajisnik, and Andrew Gillis, I'm Stephen Means. Thank you so much.